The Scottish Sentencing Council commissioned this podcast to hear what people with knowledge of the justice system had to say about the prison sentences handed down in Scottish courts. This includes a High Court judge, a representative of the Scottish Prison Service, and a prisoner currently serving a sentence, whom we will not formally identify, but her voice and words are her own. The views expressed are not necessarily those of the Council. We start with the powerful story of Council member and victims expert Lynn Burns talking about her experience following the murder of her son Sam.
My name is Lynn Burns. In October 2013, my son Sam was stabbed and murdered in our local town. Sam was my only child, and at that time the father of a 19-month-old baby girl. I would describe Sam's death as someone throwing a grenade into our lives. Before Sam was murdered, I had little, if any, knowledge at all about sentencing, about prison, about the criminal justice system in general.
We spoke to High Court Judge Lord Beckett for insight into the sentencing process.
I have to consider really everything, all of the information about the offence and the offender, but I also have to consider what is the primary purpose in the particular circumstances. Protection of the public is perhaps the prominent consideration in many High Court cases, but punishment, deterrence, which can be both individual deterrence to seek to deter the particular accused from repeating that crime, or general deterrence, which is to persuade the population as a whole not to commit that kind of crime, are relevant considerations.
We asked Jim Kerr, a senior representative for the Scottish Prison Service, for his views.
My name's Jim Kerr. I am a divisional head for the Scottish Prison Service. The concept of imprisonment is very similar, irrespective of whether it's a very young person or whether it's a very old person, whether it's a man or whether it's a woman. Effectively, the loss of liberty, being held in a secure facility, and you're held in a cell where that door's locked of an evening.
We spoke to Katrina Morrison of Napier University for her views on prison sentencing.
I'm Katrina Morrison. I'm a lecturer in criminology at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm also an associate director at the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research. Well, a prison sentence starts when a judge or a sheriff has sentenced somebody to custody, and they're then taken immediately from the court, put into a van and taken to a prison. It's usually the local prison from the court that they're first taken to. And they might spend a couple of nights there until the prison service has decided where it's best for them to go. Often prisoners move around quite a lot during their sentence, and that might be for various reasons, including the capacity of different prisons or different regimes in different prisons that might be better suited to them, or where their community and family are staying. So there's often an attempt to have prisoners closer to their family if possible.
The legal basis to keep someone in prison is a warrant, and that warrant is awarded by court. So the court decides that a person would come to prison in the first place. Now, that person may come to prison, broadly speaking, in three different sets of circumstances. The first may be for a period of remand. So it may be that the court decides that the individual is a flight risk, so someone that would not turn up for subsequent court appearances. So to ensure that they send them to prison. We see a very high footfall, a very high turnover for those people. Quite often we have little or no notice in terms of that person not returning to us from court. So it makes it very difficult to ensure that those bridges back into the community are in place. The second group would probably be those convicted to short-term imprisonment. And again, broadly speaking, that would be anyone that's sentenced to a period of under 4 years of imprisonment. That group of people, we would refer to them as short-term imprisonment. And at that stage, when the court sends that person into prison, there's a specific release date for that individual. The third group would be people that are sentenced to periods of over 4 years. They are subject to consideration by the Parole Board Scotland.
The experience of prison is a difficult one. It's a difficult environment to be in, no matter how therapeutic and enlightened the prison is.
You quite often read the phrase in some of your media around soft touch justice and soft touch Scotland. If you've never been in a circumstance where your liberty's lost, where you're told what to wear, where to go, what to have, who to associate with, how to act, if you've never been in those circumstances, then I would argue that you don't understand what a loss of liberty actually feels like in terms of punishment.
You lose all choice, like you're told when to eat, when to go to your room, when to go to sleep. A lot of the time you're in your room with your own thoughts, trying to deal with the reality that you're here and you're going to be here for a very lengthy time.
The very act of confinement is an extreme form of punishment in itself, regardless of what the actual conditions are in prison. I don't think anyone would find a prison sentence easy.
Even in a relatively light, spacious, thoughtfully designed prison, it's still a carceral environment which punishes.
Beyond that punishment aspect, we try to provide a normative environment as much as we can. And part of that's about attending a place of work.
So 7:30, staff will come in and wake you up, lock you up again. Then about 8 o'clock you go open to get ready for work. 9 o'clock we all leave the hall to go over to the central hub to our work parties. I'm in my work party until 20 to 1. In between that time we're making food, doing the dishes, serving the food, cleaning up after it. Then we come back about 1:45, we're locked up for 15 minutes. Then we're opened for 1 to 2. That's for light exercise outside time in there. And then back to work, everybody's back to work at 2. Most work parties are back about 4. We're still there till like 5:10. Again, serving food, cleaning up, doing the dishes. You come back for your work, got locked up about 5:15, 5:30. That's you until 6:30, 6:45. And then that's you opened for recreation until 8:30. Then that's you in your room to the next day and it starts all over again.
So our prison estate in Scotland is made up from 15 different prisons and 2 community custody units, and that entire estate is designed to accommodate just under 8,000 people across Scotland sentenced to imprisonment or sent to prison for a period of remand or untried. Each of those facilities are designed to cater for different classifications or groups of prisoners. So we have some prisons that accommodate men, women, young people. If you looked at the estate, the prison estate in Scotland, you would notice differences in design from prison to prison. There are some prisons that are older prisons. The prison that we're in today, for example, Perth Prison, was originally designed to hold Napoleonic prisoners of war. And our most recent prison, HMP Stirling, was only completed last year. So you will see differences in design and architecture. However, the concept of imprisonment is very similar across the estate. A prison will have a residential setting, an area of activity, an area that offers clinical support, an education facility, a facility where we can meet with loved ones, a visit room as we would call it, a reception. So largely, although there are architectural differences, the concept of imprisonment would be very similar. The differences are more subtle than what you might first see. The experience that sits within the team that actually work with that specific group of prisoners. So there are different presentations within custody for young people, as there are generally for older people or people that are serving shorter sentences of imprisonment against those serving much longer sentences of imprisonment. And as well as that experience, some of the services and some of the activities that we offer those individuals whilst in prison would differ site by site. So there, I think, overall, the main differences across the estate.
We've got 3 new prisons in Scotland that have just been built for women in prison, and they're built to be much more sort of therapeutic environments for women. And they're arguably much more pleasant places to be in than the old women's prison.
I knew that justice is about rehabilitation in Scotland, but I didn't really understand punishment, loss of liberty.
In a case of murder, the court must impose a life sentence, but must also impose what's called a punishment part, which is a period of time within which that person will be kept in prison, and it's not until the end of the punishment part time that a person can apply for parole.
However, it should not be mistaken. Often people read in the news that somebody's been sentenced to a life sentence with a punishment part of X number of years. That's absolutely not necessarily the amount of time that person will spend in custody. It can be very difficult for them to meet the requirements set by the parole board for them to be eligible to be released. But the punishment part is the minimum period of time that they will stay in prison for. The principles of punishment when it relates to prison are the same as the principle of punishment for other sentence types as well, for community sentences, in that prison is used to punish people. And we're thinking here not about what punishment might achieve in the future. We're thinking here about what punishment addresses for wrongs in the past. The idea here is that you've done something wrong, you're going to be punished for it in a sort of an equal type of measure, right? So there's that punishment element. Then there's that rehabilitative element, and that's much more forwards looking. So it's not so concerned with what happened in the past. It's much more concerned with whether this type of punishment is going to help that person to reform.
Imprisonment has, I suppose, two primary concepts. The first responsibility that we have to our country is to ensure that we maintain safe and secure custody for those people that are sent to us by the courts, whether that is for a period of remand or whether that's a short-term period of imprisonment or in fact a long-term period of imprisonment. That's our primary responsibility. Equally prominent would be to try and work with that person to undermine the reasons that they actually got there in the first place. So while someone may be convicted of a particular offence, there may be some background or underpinning issues. An example of that may be theft. So someone may be convicted of an offence that's related directly to theft, but when you actually speak to that person and look at the circumstances, it may be related to substance misuse. And if you go further back, that may be related to anxiety or a history of abuse. So there's a range or a plethora of issues there that we would try and work with that person. It's about trying to make sure that Scotland's a safer place by breaking that cycle of reoffending. All the things that someone may perceive as being something that they would link to citizenship are undermined or severed as a consequence of coming out of imprisonment. So if you had a job, chances are you're going to lose that job. If you had a house, chances are you're going to lose that.
The hardest part when I first came in was being took away from my family and my children. That's still the hardest part. My youngest daughter, she's had a really tough time with me being here. She's old enough to understand where I'm at and why I'm here. As much as it is a big part of being took away from your family in isolation, but it's also having to deal with so many different people who are on different steps in their sentences and they've all got their own issues, so try to deal with your own and try to deal with others. And you might be in a unit with people with severe mental health issues, having to deal with all that's really stressful as well.
That first stage, even in a long-term period of imprisonment, can often be about health and welfare, looking after the basics, ensuring that someone has exposure to those health and clinical services that they may need.
I got into quite a lot of trouble when I was first in. You feel as if you need to put on this big bravado to fit in. I came in and I ended up addicted to drugs, which I wasn't outside, and that was all to do with fitting in and trying to cope with the sentence that I had got and the crime I had committed. Like, I still have to try and cope with that every day.
Conversely, if you have people that are beginning or halfway through or in the later stages of very long-term imprisonment, then it does give you that opportunity to create those relationships, to engender trust that actually support a reduction in criminality and a kind of projection of pro-social citizenship.
What prison does achieve for some people is a break sometimes from a chaotic lifestyle. It's a shame that prison is something that has to provide that, but it does provide that for some people.
For many people that find themselves in prison, it's a crossroad in their life. And actually this period in prison, one of the good things about in prison is that period of reflection. And people do make the choice quite often to try and walk a different path, to make different choices. Choices that you and I may see as obvious. Having a tenancy, having a job, having people that you love and that love you, being seen as someone that contributes to your community rather than sucks the life out of it. But for many people in prison, it means that the path that you've walked for many years needs to be different. So that bridge beyond prison, that bridge back into the community, is the first steps to a different life for many people.
If we're talking about releasing into the community, it's really important to talk about what happens in prison before release. And for certain prisoners, they're told as soon as you arrive in prison, you need to start thinking about preparation for release.
I was always acutely aware that whatever sentence was passed, nothing was going to bring my son back. We're living with a life sentence, my granddaughter's living with a life sentence, and I felt that the best outcome for everyone concerned would be that if somehow during the serving of that sentence that there was a degree of rehabilitation.
So while people may be protected from somebody from a period of time, and that may indeed provide, respite for those victims, we also need to be thinking about the end point. Are people going to be less likely to offend when they're released?
If the person is not given the opportunity to address their behaviour or to understand and take responsibility for their behaviour, then it leaves the community just as unsafe as it was when they were locked up, essentially. Yes, there's the loss of liberty, but I think probably for the greater good and the safety of the community, it's really important that these programmes are undertaken within prison.
Part of the approach that we have is actually to try and find out what led to the person finding themselves in prison in the first place. When you get behind that obvious offence, there is usually a number of issues that we can help. All of the things that we would recognise as being core concepts of being a citizen within our country, having a house, having a job, having a background of education, being employable, being someone that's got relationships with others, be they loved ones or friends, someone that can associate and function in normative society. All of those things may be difficult for people that find themselves in prison. So our job is to work with that person and actually match those needs with the services that we have.
So these are psychology-based programs. They're usually CBT-based programs, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. So this is really helping people to change the way that they think. And there's a lot of focus on this as a primary way of achieving rehabilitation. And it's really important for those individuals that they can access those programs and that they can complete those programs in order to be eligible to be released by the parole board. So before we're talking about release, we actually need to really be thinking about all of this really important activity which happens prior to release.
So what are those services? Well, they may be related to substance misuse. They may be health and clinical in nature. They may require a forensic or clinical psychologist. It may be what we would refer to as an offending behaviour programme that's cognitive based, that looks at thinking skills and how people react to given situations.
Some of these courses are quite short, others are more lengthy. There are courses for different populations, so there's courses for young people, for women, and there's also anger management courses and that sort of thing. We know from the evidence that what is really important for somebody's ability to stop offending are things like relationships, acceptance from the community, ability to get a job. All of these kind of things are really important as well.
How do you make someone attractive to an employer? So we have services that are focused on vocational training and employability experience. So we're in Perth Prison today, and there are various different workshops in here. On the way up, I passed a bicycle workshop that actually, I think, does some work for communities in terms of repairing old bicycles. Now the qualification there is, I think it's Velotech, which is a professional standard qualification that you or me attending such a facility outside and in the pursuit of qualification might seek to achieve. We also have large construction workshops, we have woodworking workshops, we have metal fabrication workshops. There's a range of workshops, vocational training, qualifications and opportunities across various different prisons in Scotland.
Like, I was in Greenock 8 years and trained to be a hairdresser. I've came here, I've been in the laundry, trained in the laundry, how to use all the machines and everything, and now I'm in the kitchens, trained to use all their machines and everything. So it does, like, set you up for getting it. I didn't expect that. I just thought you'd been doing menial work and back to your cell. So no, the training in that is really beneficial for setting you up. And it gives you a sense of purpose as well. Like, just within the prison, like, you're up in the morning, you're away to your work, you're back for your lunch, back to your work and back for your dinner. So it does give you a sense of purpose.
Or it may be something simpler around core education, numeracy, communication skills. Sadly, a lot of the people that come into prison have difficulty with literacy and numeracy, so core concepts around education. All of those things wrapped together in a tapestry that we would refer to in prison parlance as a management plan, designed to ensure that when that person reaches the gate, that point of liberation, then they have the best possible prospects of actually leading their life without a further period of offending and imprisonment. Imprisonment for them, but offending for everyone else. So whilst it's focused on supporting the individual, it is about providing a safer community for everyone.
Most judges would have a broad understanding from having dealt with cases and read reports over the years as to the kinds of resources and programs available in prison. But in a particular case, we may have more detailed reports, whether from the social work department, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, where particular programs may be identified.
Sadly, many of the people that actually find themselves in prison have a different way of approaching a situation than most other people in our community may have. And that may be a reactive nature around violence or seeing violence as a means to an end. So these cognitive programmes or offending behaviour programmes can look at that thread of offending. So if someone has a high propensity for violence and might be in serving a very long period of imprisonment, rightly so for the offence that they've committed, but wants to change the way that they think, then they may expose themselves to a programme where they work in conjunction with specially trained prison officers, clinical staff and forensic psychologists that looks at the cognitive reaction they would have to a given circumstance. And that can be the same for substance misuse, it can be the same for thinking skills or relationships, or as I said, propensity for violence.
It was my first ever experience of custody or anything. So it negatively impacted me for the first couple of years. So to be fair, I expected that you would just come into prison and stagnate. Like, you'd be in your cell and that would be it. You would go to work, back to your cell. I didn't expect it to be so much focus on, like, rehabilitation and things like that. It was a big learning curve when I came in. So when I first arrived, it changed me negatively. I was trying to be this big-hearted person that I really wasn't. Trying to fit in, taking drugs, fighting, getting into trouble. But, like, over time, you realise that doesn't work. It's only yourself you're defeating. But then I started doing workshops and groups. I was always told, oh, don't go in and tell them everything, tell them what they need to know and that's it. But I thought, well, if I'm going to get anything out of it, I need to put everything into it. And they've all had a great impact, especially the offending behaviour programme. And it lasted 13 months, 3 days a week for 13 months. And the tools and things I've come away with since doing it, oh, they're invaluable. It stopped my self-harm, it stopped, like, suicidal thoughts. I was an alcoholic before I came in. I've been sober now 11 years, and I will continue to do so when I get out. I would say over the last 3, maybe 4 years, I've actually become a better person than I was even before I came in. Like, I've got more understanding about, like, people's emotions, my emotions, the reasons why I reacted to things when I did. So I would say, all in all, it's been positive at the end.
For me at the moment, in terms of whether the programmes are effective or not, really only time will tell. I think that regardless, as a family, we're living the life sentence. I don't want forgiveness or acceptance to be conditional, but I have to hope and trust in the justice system and in the Scottish Prison Service that these programmes are effective, that these programmes are well resourced and that they are being undertaken by prisoners, I have to put my trust somewhere. So at the moment I choose to put my trust in that and hope that they are effective. But whether we can say for absolute definite, time will tell.
To find out more, you can visit us at scottishsentencingcouncil.org.uk or email us at sentencingcouncil@scottcourts.gov.uk.